Looking back now, I think it was destiny that my wife and I had that argument. I won't go too in depth, but I will say it wasn't the first time I'd stormed out of the house in a rage. Ever since Tamam went missing, it was either solemn silence or violent outbursts between me and her. He was our son, the one thing in this world we were supposed to protect with every ounce of strength in our bodies, only for him to disappear right below our noses. We used to hike as a family, head up to the ridges of the Blackwood Range and get away from the city. It was grounding. Tantalizing almost. Picnicking, taking dips in whatever stream or river we could find, feeling Mother Nature embrace us in her arms. Hell, I still remember the hike we went on the day everything happened. The day our lives crumbled around us, March 16th, 2006. The air was starting to warm up again here in the valley. Trees had started blossoming again. The sun felt actually inviting rather than ironic. Tamam was 6 at the time. His mother and I had planned an entire day out for our journey, packing water, soda, sandwiches, and each of our favorite snacks. Things were going smoothly until about a half-mile into the hike. My wife had to use the restroom, and she made sure that I and Tamam knew it, complaining every 100 steps or so. It got to a breaking point when her complaints began to carry anger within them. "Can you just stop for 1 second?" she snapped, glaring at the two of us. "Whoa, there, honey," I replied as gently as possible. "No need to get upset, we'll stop. Here, I'll just stay here with the boy, you go do your business." We stepped a few feet off the trail, and I and Hemam leaned up against a boulder in the forest while his mom went behind a distant tree to do her thing. I noticed that the forest was quieter than usual, not even a single chirp of a bird. In hindsight, that should have been a dead giveaway, but in the moment all I could think about was just how beautiful the weather was. Not a single cloud in the sky. Just a bright blue canvas that looked almost too perfect. While we waited, the two of us teased a bit, poking fun at how, even though she had tried to put distance between us, we could still hear the trickle of water hitting the leaves. We went back and forth until a new sound, the snapping of a twig, choked the laughter in our throats. That's all it took. The brief moment it took for me to turn my head, and he was gone. I thought he was playing a prank at first, hiding behind the rock, waiting to jump out and scare me. I called his name once, twice, 3 times, and was met with that same unnatural silence. As if to taunt me, right on the brink of my panic attack, the forest exploded. Leaves rustling, twigs snapping, and footsteps. Fast ones that erupted through the brush at a breakneck speed. My wife came running back when she heard my shouts, appearing to be panicking herself, even though she didn't even know what had happened yet. It wasn't long before she noticed Hemam's absence, though. They were the first words out of her mouth. "Where's Hemam?" No response. "Honey, where did Hemam go?" "Did he have to go too?" "I'm crying now." "Vondani, where is our son?" There are few questions that could break a man in half, but this one destroyed me. I didn't know how to answer her. All I could do was stammer through an explanation. He was right here. I looked away for 1 second. I don't know where he went. There are a multitude of things that made my wife blame me for what happened this day. But I think that last sentence is what really drove home her newfound hatred of me. We didn't have time to dwell on that now, though. My wife didn't even wait for the last word to leave my mouth before she was darting off through the woods. The two of us must have searched an entire 5-mile radius before the sun went down, and another 5 before it rose again the next morning. With a search team, there wasn't a single part of that forest that hadn't been searched. And through all that looking, all that we found of my boy was his left sneaker. The laces were untied, and that made my heart shatter in a way that I can't explain. I just pictured him out there, alone and barefoot. It was nothing but emptiness between my wife and I from that day forward. I wanted our love to continue, but she had checked out entirely. We were both alone in the same rooms. I think what kept us together were the search efforts. In some sort of twisted way, it was like a hobby for us to search the woods, to pin up posters, to maintain hope. I swear it was like we were being toyed with every time we went back to that forest. Maybe it was just our minds breaking. Maybe we really were hearing our son call for us just beyond our reach. Maybe that's what kept us there. Illusion can only take you so far, though. And after years of enduring that illusion, I think both of our tanks were running on empty. That's probably why the argument started. We argued before, but now those spats had teeth. Personal, ugly, marriage-ending spats. We never tried for another child. It felt like betrayal, like we were abandoning the old for something new. Hemam was gone. There was nothing left for us. Each fight brought us closer and closer to the thread we had been hanging from for the last year. So when last night's argument began, I knew that thread had been severed. Instead of the usual screaming match, we just agreed with each other. Agreed that we had reached the end. There was a calmness around us, not a good calm. The kind of calm that comes right before the explosion of sound. And I wasn't going to be around for that bang. So I left, unsure of what to do. Though I'd been sober for 8 years at this point, I found it extraordinarily difficult to resist the buried urge. I can't even say it was by luck that I came across my son's missing person poster on the way to the local bar. Maybe in some alternate reality, I would have taken a different path, walked past a store I'd never seen before. But the truth is, I'd walked this route 1,000 times, watched my son's face get replaced by advertisements and missing pets. That's the thing though. It had been covered up, buried beneath years' worth of replacements. I cannot think of a feasible reason as to why it was in that storefront window, looking freshly printed. I stopped walking, freezing in place at the sight. "Have you seen me?" The words felt like a challenge. I was sick of things taunting me, sick of feeling alone, sick of feeling blamed, and sick of not having my goddamn son. I didn't need to be piss drunk to find the will to go back to that forest. The fire that burned inside me was enough to get me there and push me forward into the trees. I felt swallowed by the tall pines, a feeling that I had become far too familiar with over the last 20 years. My knees ached. My heart raced. I felt tired. I wasn't the man I was the year my son went missing. I was 48 years old at this point. I'd slowed down. Life had beaten a lot out of me, but not everything, and I used that little pinch of energy I had left to put my everything into one final search. With nothing but the flashlight on my phone to guide me, I searched like a madman. It was as though I had rediscovered the same adrenaline and restlessness I had on the day it happened. I didn't even keep track of time. It felt like every second that passed was a second that brought me closer to my sweet hitch to mom. All I knew was look. Look harder than you have in your life. That's the funniest part, or cruelest depending on how you look at it. I was so entranced that it was by sheer accident that I stumbled upon that rock. That lone boulder in the woods. I could replay the scene in my head perfectly. My wife walking deeper into the woods. I and Hemam giggling with each other. Up until this point, I figured the forest was silent due to the fact that it was nighttime. But now, I was thinking something else. Something darker. I'd been in these woods thousands of times since he went missing. Never once had it been silent. And now that I was thinking about it, I realized that it wasn't even silent at night. This silence was an omen. A calm before a storm. As if to punctuate my thoughts, once again, the forest erupted with noise. It's a weird feeling when your already racing heart drops into your stomach. I didn't know whether to pass out or start running. What froze me in my tracks, however, is when the sounds of the forest morphed into something. Something foreign to the forest, but deeply familiar to me. It was like his voice surrounded me, encircled me from every corner of the woods. "Daddy. Help me, Daddy. Daddy, I want to go home. Please, Daddy, I want to go home." It was like there was no emotion behind them, just flat pleas. Nevertheless, it had me spinning in circles. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voices stopped. The woods fell silent again. The only sound that I could hear was the snapping of a twig behind me. I turned slowly at first, afraid of what my eyes would show me the moment I turned around. However, when I heard my son's voice from directly behind me, it had me breaking my neck to look. "Look at me, Daddy," announced in that same monotone voice. And there he was, my sweet, sweet boy. My beautiful baby, H to Mom, missing a shoe. Smiling at me with that same snaggletooth smile. I scooped him up in my arms. I could finally feel him again. But what I felt didn't feel like how I remembered. There was no warmth in his stiff body. It didn't even feel like he wanted to hug me. His arms lay limply on my back as I squeezed him. I put 20 years of pain and suffering into that hug, and all I could feel was emptiness. "Come back with me, Daddy," Temem croaked. "I want you to meet my new family." Setting my son back down on the ground, I looked him in his eyes as he spoke to me about this new family. As I did so, I don't know if it's due to the fact that it was dark, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but Temem's eyes looked pitch black. "We've all been waiting so long for you to find us, Daddy. You finally did it. We can all be together now." With a cold, limp hand, my son grabbed me by mine and began tugging me deeper into the forest. With each step, it seemed like a new pair of footsteps joined us, keeping their distance from us as they stomped through the fallen leaves and pine cones. All I could do was follow him. I'd waited 20 years for this moment. I'll start off by saying, no, I didn't buy her from the back of a van. There was no mystical salesman telling me not to get her wet or expose her to bright light. I went to the pet store, picked her out, and took her home. Simple and standard. She was about 1.5 feet when I got her, definitely not small, but far from the larger end of the spectrum. A shy, quiet, and very relaxed albino python. She was tangled amongst her 2 siblings when I met her, all 3 of them hiding in the shadowy side of the tank. The salesman gently extracted her and coiled her around my arm, and she didn't budge. She just curled herself into whatever position she found most comfortable and, according to the guy, fell asleep. I named her Labe and took her home that day. She was mostly the same when I got home, quiet and content. I set her tank up immediately and got her settled into her new habitat. She slowly made her way into the corner of the tank and coiled up in the shadows. I assumed she went to sleep, but without eyelids, it's always been hard for me to tell. I left her with a bowl of water and a dead mouse. By then it was late, and I went to bed, leaving her to her own devices. When I woke up, though, she hadn't moved, and the mouse still lay dead where I had left it. I assumed she had been fed at the pet store before I bought her, so I removed the mouse and decided to leave her for the day. A few days later, I tried the same thing. Dead mouse, no cigar. I tried a few days after that, but it was still the same. 2 weeks later, I was worried. She hadn't eaten anything. I had already picked up the phone to call the store and ask for advice when the idea hit me. What if she didn't want pre-killed mice? Generally, as a rule, it is said that you shouldn't feed a snake a live mouse, since the rodent can fight back and possibly injure the snake. But at this point, I was desperate. I had assumed her quiet and subdued nature was just her personality. But this was different. I knew I had a few live mice, so why not try it? If anything happened, I could have just grabbed the mouse and stopped it from harming her. It was worth a shot. She had left her corner before the mouse was even in the enclosure, eyeing both me and it through the glass as I approached. I placed the mouse in the opposite corner of the tank and watched. The mouse sat in its corner, its ears twitching and alert to any slight rustle or hint of danger. Labe moved slowly, hiding behind the tree branch in her enclosure as she approached. Then, before I could even register it happening, she darted out into the open, her mouth opening wide as a black, bile-like substance shot from the back of her throat toward the mouse. The rodent turned to spring away, but not fast enough. It was covered in the black liquid. I could hear the tiniest gurgling squeal of pain burbling up from under the black substance. It began to foam, a slow, sizzling froth, each bubble becoming slightly redder than the last. Despite the cage being closed, I could smell it. A foul, sickening odor like sour milk and burnt hair. I'm no expert, but I knew that definitely wasn't typical for the species, especially considering pythons are non-venomous. I gagged as the smell forced its way through the room and down into my lungs. Backing away from the living room, one hand pinched over my nostrils, I quickly slipped my shoes on and headed out. Calling the pet store was already the plan, but now I had to ask in person. Either I had to return her, or I had to buy more mice. The store owner said he had never heard of something like that. But he also suggested she might have been some strange crossbreed, since they hadn't bred her themselves but bought her and her siblings from a supplier. He noted that I had already paid for her, so if I wanted to keep her, she was mine. I left the store with multiple mice, all of them alive. By the time I had returned home, the mouse had become a pile of pulsing pink and gray flesh. As far as I could tell, I had walked in just as Leia began to consume it. The smell had since dissipated, being 10 times weaker, but it had somehow permeated every corner of my apartment. I dropped one more mouse into the cage with her and left the room, shutting the door behind me, not wanting to experience the smell or sight again that day. Soon, I began feeding her mice every day, sometimes 2 when the whim struck me. Supposedly, she was meant to be eating around once a week at her size, but she always seemed hungry. The smell disappeared, at least to my nose, shortly after it started. After a while, the sight of liquefied mouse became just another part of the day. I never noticed until reflecting on it now, but she never left any fecal matter, which I suppose explains her rapid weight gain. Within the span of a month, she had doubled in size, and shortly after that, she was closing in on becoming too big for the tank I had bought. I had to run by the pet store again to buy the largest tank they had, which I was less than pleased about. It was, hopefully, future-proof, since Labe appeared not to be a typical python. I had to move her from my shelf to the floor, her new home taking up an unfortunate amount of space. Her insatiable hunger had already been draining my wallet faster than anticipated, but the vivarium was also far from cheap. Thankfully, I was able to sell the other tank back to the store for a little money, after I had thoroughly cleaned the blood spatter of mouse remains off the walls and floor. It was around this time that I noticed her face. Every now and then, I would take her out of her tank, hold her, and let her chill on the sofa with me. It was hard to see at first, and I felt it before I saw it. As she slowly dragged herself across my arm, around her nostrils had grown small, almost invisible hairs. I could feel a whisper of them as her face bumped up against the back of my hand. A week later, they had grown out and thickened to roughly a 1/4 inch long, white as the scales they grew between. There were times she would slither off and disappear behind a sofa or some other piece of furniture, though the door stayed closed for safety. Still, there were a few times I found bubbling piles of undigested flesh in some corners of the room, and once or twice in other parts of the house. A month later, she was approaching 6 feet in length and was now wider than my forearm. I'd fed her the usual live prey before heading out that night to meet up with my friend Velen. Eventually, she ended up returning home with me for a few more drinks after we had been kicked out of the club so they could close. Her reaction to Labe was far from what I had been expecting. Disgust or fear were the typical responses I had grown accustomed to, but fascination was a new one. What took me even more by surprise was her request to hold Labe. Labe was always very docile, unless you were a mouse, so I didn't see the harm in it. By now, she was a hefty creature, pure muscle and bone, so I had to lay her across Veline's shoulders and guide her toward her hand. As slow as always, she slid her way across Veline's arm and toward her hand as Veline giggled at the sensation. "She's so warm, I didn't think snakes were warm," she said, looking up at me with a mix of awe and confusion. I shrugged, and we both turned back to look at Labe, who had by now inconspicuously slid up to Veline's hand and sunk her thumb into her mouth. Velen's face crinkled as she looked back at me, concerned. Is she supposed to be? I don't know, she's not biting me, but either way, it was obvious Velen was no longer comfortable. I stepped closer, preparing to remove Lade from her arm as the snake began to gag. Velen winced as a thick black fluid began to seep out from behind Labe's lips. A few seconds later, Velen was shakily but sternly asking me to remove the snake. I dug my fingers into the python's body, trying to pry her free, but she wrapped around tighter, her body becoming a steel cable that couldn't be moved. Velen began to cry, pleading with me, God, or anyone to help her, as a familiar bubbling began to appear around the base of her thumb. Labe had coiled herself tighter around Velen's arm, causing the exposed skin to turn a bright red and then blue as the blood flow ceased. I tried digging my fingers into Labe's mouth to pry her off that way, But as her lips loosened, the frothing black bile spilled over onto my fingertips, and the white-hot burning that followed forced me to pull my hands away. Valine was screaming, her free hand tugging desperately at Labe's tightly wound midsection, but to no avail. Labe's grip on her arm only grew tighter, forcing the limb as straight as it would go, as she began to slide her mouth deeper onto Velen's hand, her entire thumb up to the wrist having disappeared into the hungry void. There was a soft crunching, followed by a very audible crack as Velen's arm folded back on itself, the bright white spike of her humerus poking out into the open air from her now misshapen elbow. Labe hadn't expected the sudden change in Velen's arm and loosened her grip, flopping onto the floor with her mouth still wrapped around Velen's thumb. I grabbed Labe's body and yanked hard, tearing her free. She landed in a coiled pile in the corner, like a spring, but she didn't stay like that for long, quickly finding her bearings and lunging back at Velen. I grabbed Velen by the arm and pulled her out of the way, running out the living room door and slamming it behind us. Velen was crying, gripping her limp, broken arm to her chest. Her hand at the end of her dangling forearm was beginning to bubble and hiss as the flesh of her thumb slowly turned to liquid. "Hold the door closed," I told her as I disappeared around the corner to the kitchen. She pushed her good shoulder into the door, leaning against it as tears streaked down her cheeks. She screamed as a heavy thud rang out from behind the door. I returned shortly after with a chair to wedge under the door handle, but as Valine moved away, another disgusting thud against the wood forced it to swing open. I rammed my shoulder into the door, slamming it shut. But as I did, Labe's tail shot through the gap, holding it open. I kicked the door as hard as I could, clamping down on the tip of her tail. There was a fizzy squeal of pain from behind the door as Labe used every foot of her muscular stature to try and pull her tail out. The tip of the tail began to tear slowly with a dry, sucking sound, reminiscent of the sound of tearing Velcro. The door closed with a lurch, leaving the last 2 inches of Labe slowly flowing and gyrating on the floor next to us. I forced the chair under the door handle and kicked the tip of her tail away as it wormed its way toward Velen. It hit the wall with a splat, a deep purple ichor oozing out of the severed stump, as what looked like a tiny malformed thumb began to wriggle and grow out of the bleeding end. The alcohol hadn't left my system yet, but at that point, I didn't care. We climbed into the car, and I raced us to the nearest infirmary. Velen's racing heart and mind couldn't comprehend the pain anymore, and she finally passed out in the passenger seat. She didn't wait for the journey, and I had to carry her into the ER. They took her from me, and I was left on a cold chair in the waiting room for hours. But I didn't mind. The only other choice was returning home to Labe. I was awakened in the late hours of the morning by a nurse gently shaking me. She led me through the quiet halls to an even quieter room where a barely awake Valine lay. I don't know how else to describe it other than that she looked awful. Her eyes were sunken, and her skin was as white as the creature that had attacked her. Her arm was wrapped tightly in a large suspended cast that stretched from her shoulder to her wrist. Her hand was free, but barely, wrapped tightly in gauze. The nurse told me her arm had been bound and cast to treat the obviously broken elbow. It would take months of recovery, but her arm should hopefully return to something reminiscent of full function eventually. Her hand, however, wasn't as fortunate. Her thumb had suffered 4th-degree chemical burns and had thus required amputation. She was on morphine being pumped through her free arm, but I could tell by the look on her face that it wasn't nearly enough. I tried to give her a reassuring smile, but it faltered almost immediately. All I could say was, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I've had worse dates," she said, smiling weakly. I let out a small laugh, but it didn't last. I knew both of us were trying our best to hold back tears. She lay back on her pillow and closed her eyes. "Going back to sleep?" She nodded before falling quiet. She's still asleep now, and I'm sitting in the room with only the slow beep of her EKG machine to keep me company. I'll have to go home eventually, but when is yet to be determined. The best case scenario would be that Labe is still locked in the living room. Maybe I could starve her out, but I get the feeling that it would be a fruitless endeavor. Alternatively, she could have broken out and be anywhere in the house, or, if not, anywhere else. If she can sink her teeth into anything in the area, I don't know what will happen. At the moment, I don't plan on leaving the medical center. You can call me a coward, but I honestly don't care. I can't stay here forever, though. I know I'll have to return eventually. We'll see. I finally got some news from the doctors this morning. Felon still hasn't woken since yesterday, but her heart rate has been slowly rising for the past few hours. So far, they're not sure why, but if it continues, they're worried it could be as a result of a possible infection from her elbow wound. Alternatively, it could be poisoning from Labe's venom. I think they said they have to run some tests before they'll know for sure. They're going to keep her for the foreseeable future to monitor her progress and changes. I'm worried, and obviously, I plan on staying with her as long as I can. But a little disgusting corner of my mind is glad to have an excuse not to have to return home for now. I've been told the police are coming by tonight. I thought the staff wasn't meant to question things when you arrive, but I suppose it varies. I don't know what to tell the authorities. Not a single part of the story is coherent or exists in a manner in which I can explain it all away. It's going to be a long few days, it seems. I never pictured myself feeling like a drifter at 17. I was a loner, a dropout, a nobody. Working under-the-table jobs to keep myself afloat. I wanted something new, something grounding, the kind of employment that felt rewarding rather than sketchy. That's when I found the apothecary. That dusty help wanted sign in the front window felt like an omen. Like fate itself was whispering in my ear, pushing me through the front door. The bell chimed above me as the door swung open, prompting the man behind the counter to look up from his copy of the local newspaper. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice dry and distant, bordering on irritated. I told him I'd seen his sign, explained that I needed the job, tried to sell myself as a loyal, great employee, though I'd been fired by 4 separate employers. He studied me for a moment, eyes sharp and vigilant. The silence in the room was broken only by the low hum of the refrigerated display cases that lined the walls, each one filled with assorted vials of fluid. One of those coolers felt wrong, though. It was darker than the others, more grimy, with streaks of rust snaking down its exterior. Finally, after what felt like centuries, the man spoke again. 4 employers, huh? The question set me back. I had not said that aloud, and why would I? How did you... When you've been in the industry as long as I have, son, you start to pick up on certain things. Believe me when I tell you, this shop is no place for a young man like you. I blinked with confusion. This man, whose name was Alan, didn't know me. He couldn't possibly. But after another long stretch of silence, he spoke again. "I'll tell you what, come back tomorrow. Give me some time to get the place cleaned up. I'll let you see how the business runs. Then you can decide for yourself if you want to stay." I left the shop feeling uneasy, but also hopeful as to what the next day entailed. I slept on a park bench that night and showered at an old spigot near a restaurant in town. I made sure to do this early so as not to get caught by the owners or other employees. I arrived back at the apothecary around 9 in the morning, and of course, the help wanted sign still hung in the window. Alan hadn't been lying. He really did clean up the place. The first thing I noticed was the glossy look on that previously decrepit-looking display case. I wanted to see what was inside. Ever so slowly, I made my way over to it, inching closer and closer until the man's voice stopped me in my tracks. "Back so soon?" he asked. "Figured I'd get ahead of the curve," I replied. With a chuckle, Alan gestured for me to come behind the counter. "Well, since you're here," he said with a yawn, "guess I'll give you the tour." Guiding me to the back of the shop, we passed all manner of tools for the trade. That there's the centrifuge, that there's the distiller. And here you have your storage. The man opened the door, and a gust of frigid air punched me in the face. Inside, I saw row after row of heavy canisters hanging from iron hooks, swaying back and forth methodically. There was also something else, though. Something that I'm positive was not part of a regular apothecary's job. In the back corner, lying in piles against the wall, were bags. Bags that held shapes that looked a little too familiar, a little too human. "Those are our special deliveries," Alan chirped. "Biological assets that our clientele pay top dollar for." I turned to face him and noticed that his mouth had curled into a devilish grin. "So what do you think, boss?" he asked. "Still wanting the work?" Before I could answer him, the chiming of a bell interrupted me, and we both made our way back to the front. We were greeted by a tall, brooding man dragging one of those bags behind him. I noticed that it seemed to move, twitching in ways that were unnatural, and when I heard the faint scream from underneath, the discreetness the guy had been displaying started to make sense. So why am I telling you all this? Well, I'm writing this now to inform you all, once you get past your humanity, work at the Apothecary is a killer gig. I reckon this is the place to share this kind of thing, and I hope in good faith it'll be understood for what it was. For context, I want it to be known that I live in a flyover state on the Great Plains of the American West on the same homestead my family has occupied since the early 20s. We're not cut off from civilization, and we're not a bunch of hicks with no concept of the big, fancy things you get in shithole cities on the coast. We're simply a bit remote, and being remote comes with a lot of grass, corn, and the occasional ruins of an old house. That said, all of this is just to help you understand where I'm coming from. When I was growing up on my family ranch, I had free reign of that land. Acre after acre was my playground, and I spent my boyhood days playing in the tall grass and shooting my BB gun at anything that looked too threatening. I killed a snake one time. That much I remember, though I can't remember what kind. Poor thing was just minding its business, and some 9-year-old with a god complex decided to take its life. I remember the color of its red blood against the yellow grass. It convulsed and writhed until finally it stopped. I'd never really seen anything die until that moment, and it stuck with me worse than I could say. I didn't even know why I'd done it, except for the sake of killing. I think that day stays with me because of the man I met soon after. While I was in mourning for the innocent little creature I'd murdered, I found myself once again in the field outside my house. In my roaming through the tall grass, I found myself on the edge of the property. I'd made a little cross out of popsicle sticks and was placing it out for the garden snake when a deep voice made me jump. Lost a friend there? I spun around to see a tall man standing about 4 yards away. He was dressed like an old cowboy. He had one of those bib shirts you see them wearing in old photos, along with a wide hat dirty from use. In fact, he was caked in soil and clay, so much so that I couldn't tell what the color of his clothes was and what was earth. The only thing he was missing was his boots. He stood there, in the hot, dry grass of the prairie, with bare feet, bloody from walking. He looked from me to the little grave I'd made, and sighed. A crying shame, ain't it? I nodded as he continued. What was it that did your little friend in? I gave a sharp look back at the house, wondering if my parents could still see me and if they saw this stranger, but I felt rude, so I answered him. I did, sir. I killed him. He tilted his hat back and sucked his teeth. Damn shame. He kicked up a clump of grass with his foot. Ain't no use getting too broke up about it. Some things have to get done, and I can't say I haven't done the same. His words were odd to me, and the longer I stood there with him, the longer I felt I was doing something wrong. However, as I took a step back, he knelt down to my eye level, meeting me with a large mustache and dark gray eyes. We all gotta shuffle along at some point, he said, but that don't mean we ever get to leave. I started feeling something in his words that tugged at me. There was something magnetic to the man that almost forced me to look at him. Where are you from, mister? I asked, still looking for my parents. He chuckled and pointed with his thumb. I'm from back over yonder, a few hills away, he told me. But before then, I had a family and home in Alantase. Where is your family now? I said. He gave me a pensive look as his eyes welled up. They're far from here, he told me. I miss them dearly. I told him I was sorry, but glanced away. I expected my parents to come running any minute then, but instead, the cowboy leaned in close to me with breath that smelled like rotten fruit. Can you help me get back to them? It was then that I heard a shotgun blast and looked to the house. My mother and father were running towards me, guns in hand, and screaming something about trespassing. My mother scooped me up and started carrying me back to the house, but in the confusion, as I looked over her shoulder, the man was gone. My father was blasting shells into the wide grass, but nothing was hit. Not a thing was there to hit. When we got back to the house, my parents phoned the sheriff. She and the deputies swept our property for the man, but came back with nothing. I heard my father giving them a statement as the night closed through our windows. He was there 1 minute and gone the next, he told them. I've never seen him before in my life. My parents made me go to bed early that night, and my father told my mother he'd be staying up for a bit in the living room, pistol at the ready. They locked me in my room and told me they loved me, but I couldn't shake the feelings of confusion and attachment I'd developed for that stranger from the prairie. There was a sadness in my mind that plagued me like a disease. It was an intense loneliness that made my heart break and consumed my thoughts. Young though I was, something from that man's gaze and voice had leaked into me and stained me in some way. I wanted to help him, if for no other reason than ridding myself of that pain. Then, as if in direct response, there was a tap on my window. I don't need to tell you who it was. He was there, beckoning me to come to the glass, and I went. I quietly slid open the pane, and he met me at the window's base. "Hello again, young'un," he said. He looked through me for a moment before a sad smile set into his whiskered face. "I see it's got hold of you too. You feel that same gnawing pain, don't you?" "What is it?" I asked him. "What's happening to me?" "It's the plains, young'un," he said. "The lonely places have a hunger, and we are their unfortunate food." "How do you get it to stop?" I asked him. "How do you make it stop?" The man bit his lip and looked at me, his dark eyes filled with that same intense pain that stung deep in my chest. "Come with me," he said with an outstretched hand, "and I'll show you." I remember very little after he took my hand. Somewhere in my brain, a part of that night lives like a dream, and the rest is the fractured recollection of my senses. He hummed a song I couldn't quite place, but that sounded familiar to something my grandfather used to sing. It was low, raspy, and mournful as a heartbroken hound dog. The smell of the damp clay on his back and the sight of the starry sky that held no moon blurred between the words he spoke. "The prairie is a hungry land," he told me as he carried me on his back. "It's a starving place that is never full." "Why is it hungry?" I remember asking him. He waited a long time to respond. "We made it hungry," he said, "and now the earth is greedy for its meals. It don't want to let some of us go, you understand. It needs us still, so it can get every last drop and bite out of us. Then, just maybe, it'll let us go." "I didn't think the earth got hungry," I told him. He spat at the ground and sighed. Neither did I. At some point, after a while of walking, he placed me down and gestured to me to come over a dip in the hillside. Waiting there for me was a hole in the ground, narrow and rectangular, with clods of sod and damp grass caked around its edges. There was a piece of broken wood that sat at its head, sticking out of the pale grass. 1 or 2 rocks were gathered at its base, but there was nothing more to decorate the informal crater. The man continued humming his song as he walked behind me and put his hands on my shoulders. They were cold and cracked like old oven mitts. My heart raced. "What is this?" I said. He patted me softly. "This is my home now," he told me. "Far from Allantace, from Tennessee. Far from Allantace, from Tennessee, from everywhere, really. This is the plot I owe the prairie, and she don't like me wandering far." I was confused and asked him what he was talking about, but he ignored me. When they shot me and took my horse and boots, they fed me to the prairie. For nothing more than a joke, they left me here and bound me to the soil that drinks me. He leaned in close to my ear, and I could feel his whiskers brush my cheek. "I've been in the womb of the earth, boy, and I've heard the prairie name its price. Ain't nothing can be got except by what is begotten." His hands tightened on my collarbone. "Ain't nothing old can come out unless something new is put in." Shaking, I looked at the man who'd led me into the wild grass and beheld him in the pale starlight. The man was skeletal, with dry, tissue-thin skin stretched over a mud-stained frame. His mustache clung to his bone lips like cobwebs, and his dark eyes, I realized, had never been there at all. There were only sockets darker than his grave before me, and a crack between them where a bullet once must have entered. "Please," he croaked at me, but I didn't listen. I was running before I even had the chance to cry. I didn't know what direction I was running in because all I saw was grass. Endless grass. For miles ahead of me, there wasn't a light of life or presence besides the earth under my feet. I could still feel the man's whiskers against my cheek and hear his begging pleas to help him, save him, from the torment he was in. I couldn't pay that price. I couldn't go there instead of him. I shouted to him as loud as I could how sorry I was. I was so sorry. Eventually, I ran face first into my dad's legs. He was holding a lantern, and I swear he would have shot me if he hadn't recognized my cries. He and my mother had searched for hours once they realized I wasn't in my room. I couldn't believe I'd been gone for so long. I could see police lights out in the driveway of our house and hear the sighs of relief that piled in as I was taken inside and cleaned up. I had to sleep with my parents that night, but I couldn't shut my eyes. Past their window, where the moonless sky was lit up with stars, I could still hear the shadow of his voice. I heard his lonesome sobs, his groaning, and his song, that low, raspy tune from so long ago. I'm a grown man now, and my parents still live in that house. I'm visiting with them and talk with them about that incident last night. My dad hardly remembered it, as did my mom, but I think they were downplaying it. I heard my dad singing a tune I never managed to forget. I asked him what it was called, and he couldn't remember much about it, just that Grandpa used to sing it when he was younger. He only knew a handful of words. I want to be laid where mother's prayers and sister's tears will mingle there, where friends will come and weep over me. Oh, bury me, not on the lone prairie, each dot. I don't go to the prairie anymore by myself. This evening, from the guest bedroom of my family's old house, I saw a figure on the horizon of the sunset waving at me. I still hear his tune on the wind. I still feel that ache in my chest. The man is still there on the horizon, waving at me in the dying light, begging me to come to him. Look, your son is provoking us. He must have done something. Time passed. Please make him understand. He's troubling me. Don't do this. More time passed. He hit me for no reason. He must have done something too. More time went by. Your son was caught stealing. My son would never do that. Just a little more time passed. Your son stabbed a boy in anger, and we've come to arrest him. That's impossible. He would never do something like that. My son is so innocent. He could never do this. There's no point stopping it now. Hey babe, I'm working late tonight. Gotta finish that project for Hendrix. Don't wait up. Love you. I listened to the message for the third time. I couldn't believe he was doing it again. When he got in his new job 2 months ago after being fired from the lab, I'd been happy for him. But once he'd started working there, he started acting differently, becoming crueler, more arrogant. Hey babe, have you gained a couple of pounds? Babe, you gained a couple of pounds? Babe, you always look so stressed lately. You know that's not great for your face, right? Why is the house so messy, babe? You're slacking off. It's true that I had less time to clean lately, and that I'd put on a few pounds. Carrying the financial load by yourself can do that to you. Funny how all the veiled insults started at the same time as all his late nights, working. I was no fool. But Arden denied everything and told me I was overreacting. I needed proof, but he never left any clues. He was too smart. So I followed him. I felt pathetic doing it, but I had to know. One day, after he left work, I followed him to a house in the Highlands. After waiting a few minutes, I crept to a side window and looked inside. I saw a figure moving around. I could just barely make out a woman's body. That bastard. I got up to storm inside and give them a piece of my mind when I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head, then nothing. I woke up and tried to reach for my head, but my hands wouldn't move. I looked down and realized my arms and legs were bound to a chair. I looked up, and what I saw shocked me. My husband stood there, staring at me hatefully, and standing next to him was another woman. No, not another woman. Me. At least, me in almost every way. The same eyes, the same mouth, the same hair, the same dimple in my chin. She looked exactly like I used to look before the last few years. Before Arden. Yes, it's amazing, isn't it? How she can be so exactly like you, yet so different. I stared at them, stunned. But how? I was working to create a temporal viewer, a window into the past. But then we realized the machine wasn't showing us another time. but another place, another Earth, like ours, but different. And the most amazing part, it had versions of us on it, all of us. So I went there. The Arden Westbrook there was a loser, single and alone. Then I looked up their Talezi background. She was Samazinge. Thin, gorgeous, vivacious like you before we got married. But she'd had some heartbreaks and was looking for a new life. When I told her about our world, she asked if she could come with me. I said yes. Why wouldn't I? I deserved the best version of you. Now I'd have it. Of course, we couldn't have two versions of you walking around. Someone was bound to notice. So we made a plan. A few insults, a couple of hints, and you followed right along, like a desperate puppy. Then the other's woman walked toward me. I can see what Arden meant, she said, examining me like imitation jewelry. You're like the bargain basement version of me, a bad copy. How sad it must be to be you. But don't worry, it'll all be over soon. With that, my doppelganger raised her hand to reveal a knife, light glinting off the blade. She was going to kill me, and tied down, I couldn't stop her. But from the corner of my eye, I saw another light, a red dot. I heard a soft whip, and there was a hole in her head. As she fell, I looked over. Arden was laying on the ground, his hand trying to stop the blood pouring from his chest. I felt someone pulling at the ropes on my wrists and legs. As they did, I saw a masked figure standing over Arden's gurgling form. Got you, you son of a bitch. She lifted her mask just enough to spit on his face. Who are you? I asked, looking at my rescuers. What's going on? They looked at each other, then at me. The one who'd spit on my former husband took off her mask. Then the other two did the same. They all looked exactly like me. I'm Talazib Hasgint, nay Grant, said the first. Talazib Kimak. Beth, said the second. Talazib Troper, but you can call me Lizzie, said the third with a half smile. But I don't. I know it's a lot to take in, said Lizzie. Basically, your husband was right about all but one thing. There isn't just one's other Earth. There are thousands. And in many of them, continued Beth, we ended up with your husband or some jerk like him. Different names, same asshole. So why are you here? We tend to keep tabs on other versions of us, and we found out about your husband's plans for you, Beth said harshly. So we got involved. I looked around at the 5 figures in the room. 3 standing, 2 not. So what happens next? The leader, who I'd started thinking of as Talazib Bream, looked at me. Well, these bodies are going to cause questions. You can stay here and deal with them, or you can come with us and help other women who are going through what you did. I paused and thought about my life, my job, my happiness. Then I looked at Talazib. May I? I asked, gesturing at her gun. She raised an eyebrow at me and gave a slight nod. I took out the gun, aimed, and put a bullet through Arden's head. Call me L. When do we leave? The first full night, my wife slept after our son died. I stayed awake to make sure she was still breathing. That isn't poetic. I sat upright in bed, watching her chest rise and fall in the dark, as if I let myself drift off again, she might stop. Grief does that to your brain. It strips out the useful bits and leaves you with the instincts of a trapped animal. Leor died in April at the mountain pass. It was cold. The kind of day where locals sit outside cafes in coats and sunglasses, determined to enjoy themselves out of spite. We'd gone because he liked the cable car, and because Clara said we should start doing normal family things again after my dad's funeral. I was paying for coffees when it happened. That's the detail I always come back to. I was standing at a hatch with my card in my hand while Clara helped Leor with his gloves. Then somebody dropped a tray behind me. I turned for maybe a second, and by the time I looked back, she was shouting his name at the ravine. They said later it was quick. They always say that like it helps. Afterward, Clara stopped sleeping properly. At first, she just woke crying. Then she started waking, convinced she'd heard him coughing downstairs. Twice I found her in his room in the middle of the night, standing beside the bed with one hand on the blanket, listening. By June, she was opening the front door in her sleep. The first time, I found her barefoot on the path in one of my jumpers, staring into the street. When I asked what she was doing, she looked confused and said, "He'll be freezing." After that, I hid the keys. She still found ways. The side latch. The chain. Once, I woke to the sound of the kitchen window scraping open and found her halfway out onto the bins in the rain. I started sleeping in joggers and a hoodie so I could run after her. I learned which floorboards creaked, what time her tablets kicked in, and how to take a front door key out of someone's hand without frightening them. Other times, she'd go quiet and say, "I heard him, Mark. I know what I heard." By September, there were towels drying on the radiator because she said he hated being cold after the snow. In October, I found one of his little plastic mountain picks in our bed, tucked beneath her pillow. The doctor said grief had no normal shape and increased her prescription. Then, in November, she started sleeping. Not all at once, just longer. Then properly. Then through. The first morning she woke after nearly 9 hours. She looked annoyed by how bright the kitchen was and asked if we had any bread left. I nearly cried over the toaster. After that, things came back in small pieces. She ate. She showered without me reminding her. She packed away some of Lior's clothes, though not many. She laughed once when I swore at a cupboard door, and then looked startled, like the sound had come out of someone else. By Christmas, people were saying how much better she seemed. I hated hearing that. It made it sound tidy. Still, they weren't wrong. In January, she suggested we go away for a weekend. "Just somewhere quiet," she said. I looked at her for a long time before answering. "Where?" "The past," she said, and when my face changed, she added, "I'd rather go back than keep imagining it." So we booked 2 nights in a small hotel near the Alpine Trail in Vermont. Off-season. Half the shops shut, the gondola dark, crows screaming over empty benches. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old radiator heat. It was bleak enough that it almost felt safe. Clara loved it. She was lighter. She stood by the window with a cup of tea and watched the fog roll in as if listening to someone she liked in the next room. At dinner, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That night, she let me hold her and didn't go stiff when I touched her waist. "I think this was a good idea," I said. She nodded. "I do too." We walked the trail the next morning with our collars up against the wind. She stopped once, looking out at the gray peaks, and said, "It's quieter than I remember." I didn't know what to say to that. Later, back in the room, she fell asleep in the chair by the window with a paperback open on her chest. Asleep. I stood there looking at her, feeling something dangerously close to hope. That last evening, we ate hot soup from a thermos in the car because the rain was coming sideways. Clara laughed when broth splashed on my jeans. On the walk back, she put her arm through mine and said, "I think he knows I came back." "Who?" She didn't answer straight away. Then she said, "Lior?" I looked at her, but she was watching the mountain. That night, I slept harder than I had in months. When I woke, her side of the bed was empty. For one stupid, glorious second, I thought she must be in the bathroom. Then I saw the room door standing open and felt something cold move through me. I ran to the window. The slope was almost empty in the morning, gray, just wet stone, and a line of thin mist. Clara was down there in her nightdress and coat, the hem already dark with mud, standing knee-deep in the scrub brush. She wasn't alone. She was holding our son's hand. He was turned away from me, in the little yellow coat we lost him in, hood up against the wind. Clara looked down at him like mothers do when a child has finally stopped crying. Then she took another step, and he stepped with her there. For my 17th birthday, my parents decided to drive me to my coffee date with Emily, something I was perfectly capable of doing by myself. "Soon you'll be all grown up," Dad said, "so forgive us if we want to be a part of your life just a little bit longer. It's not every day you get to drive your daughter to her very first date." Mom smiled. "I've been on dates before," I muttered from the back seat. "Oh, honey, middle school doesn't count," Mom laughed. "Real dates. With a real girlfriend." Emily and I weren't even dating. I mean, not yet. "We're just friends, Mom," I said, blushing. "You're making it weird." "Don't mind your mother," Dad said. "We're not going to go inside and introduce ourselves. We won't embarrass you in front of your crest. Your friend who's a girl," Mom added. Dad snapped his fingers. "Here, girlfriend." They both laughed, and I buried my head in my hands and groaned. "Looks like we're here," Dad announced as he pulled into the roasted bean. Honey, before you go, Mom unbuckled her seatbelt so she could turn around and ask me directly. I was wondering if you had given any thought to what your father and I talked about what your plans are after you graduate. I'm still thinking about it, I grumbled. There's no pressure, Dad said. Your mother and I will support you no matter what you choose, but we'd love to see you join the family business. I said, I'm thinking about it. I rolled my eyes. Can I go now? Go have fun on your date, Mom beamed. We'll pick you up in an hour. Dad smiled. I got out of the car and walked through the front doors to the roasted bean. Emily was already here. She ran over and gave me a hug that sent my heart aflutter. Happy birthday, Emily said, and took me by the hand and dragged me over to a corner booth. Wait, shouldn't we order something? I interjected, but as we came to the booth, there were already 2 drinks waiting for us. I ordered your favorite, iced caramel frappuccino, with 3 shots of caramel, 2 shots of vanilla, and extra caramel topping. She knew my coffee order. The butterflies in my stomach were starting to break dance. Oh, thank you, I said, trying not to sound too flustered. Come on, sit down, you have to open your present. Emily pulled a small box from her purse that was tightly bound in baby blue wrapping paper and an adorable pink bow. Emily, you didn't have to. Oh, hush, you haven't even opened it yet. It's not worth getting all gushy about. Okay, I said, and opened her present. Inside, resting on a tiny pillow, was an expensive tube of bubblegum lip gloss. I noticed that you've been biting your chapped lips lately. This stuff is really great for moisturizing. Emily smiled, and then added, plus it tastes great. I tried not to think too hard about why Emily might be staring at my lips. It's a nasty habit, I admitted. I've been stressed out lately. Half the time, I don't even realize I'm doing it. Girl, what has got you so stressed lately? My parents, they want to know what I'm doing after I graduate. What are you doing after you graduate? I have no idea, but they want me to follow in their footsteps. Emily reached across the table and gently held my hand, rubbing her thumb across the back of my knuckles. Tell me about it. Emily was so sweet and so easy to talk to, so even though I shouldn't have, I told her everything. They want me to be a serial killer, I gulped, like they are. Doesn't seem like a very lucrative career. Emily didn't even bat an eye as she responded. Well, you might be surprised. My parents, they target senior citizens, people who have saved up money their entire lives. They make it look like they died in their sleep. Then they find their computer, bring up their online banking, and transfer all their money to themselves into Bitcoin. They've actually made a ton of money doing that. Oh my God, Emily said in a hushed voice. Your parents are the Sandman? They really don't like that nickname. I rolled my eyes. I shouldn't even be telling you this. The point is, they want me to follow in their footsteps, but I don't think I have it in me. Even if the money is lucrative, I feel for you. My parents want me to follow in their footsteps too. Oh yeah? What do your parents do? They work for the city. Emily reached into her purse and pulled out a badge that she hung from her neck. Special investigators for the Iron Harbor Police Department. Suddenly, I noticed the blue and red lights flashing in the parking lot. Mom and Dad were parked outside. Had it been an hour already, the police were handcuffing them to the hood of their car. No, stop. I tried to get up, but Emily caught me by the hand, her grip no longer gentle. Sit down, she said, and for some reason I listened. Emily pulled down the collar of her shirt, and I would have turned beet red were it not for the small black microphone taped to her chest. We have everything we need to put them away for good. Listen to me. I'm sorry I had to mislead you, but your parents are not good people, and you do not have to be like them. I never really thought about what I wanted to do with my life, but sitting across from Emily, heartbroken, I realized that I did want to follow in my parents' footsteps, and I already knew who my first victim would be. Mama, come watch how high I can swing. I turn away from the pantry window. I know I should be happy to watch my daughter play, but since she passed away 3 years ago, it just hasn't been the same. Without raising my eyes from the soapy water in the sink, I draw the curtains. Next, I dart across to the cellar door and slide the deadbolt across, which lands with a reassuring thunk. I realize with a familiar, growing dread that she has stopped calling for me. I tell myself maybe tonight it will be different. I don't hold out much hope. If the last 1,094 days are anything to go by, the thing that was once my daughter will spend the night patrolling, testing every entrance for any sign of weakness, for a way in. I don't know what it wants. But after all this time, I am beginning to consider whether whatever she, no, Sitsi, would do to me can be any worse than the nightmare I've been subsisting in. With a low, almost imperceptible creak, the thing on the other side of the door tries the handle. My hand shakes as I release the deadbolt. I step back and the door swings open. Mama, I've missed you.